Welcome to this monthly, supposed to be bi-weekly, but monthly edition of Dark Lord of Optics Live. I do the best I can, and then whatever happens, happens. I'll give it a couple more minutes to let a few people join, and then as we go along, there are a few topics I want to cover, but I do not have any sort of a long pre-prepared lecture. So with that in mind, if you have any questions, anything that comes up, do not hesitate to ask. Okay. Okay, Mr. Lee Tintel joined just to apologize that he can't stick around for the whole thing. Well, I appreciate that, sir. All right, Chana's here. Sounds like audio and video is okay. I don't like the way the camera is pointed. I have 3 scopes here I'm going to talk about a little bit, and they're barely visible, so let me move the camera slightly. And that should be better. All right, I think this is a little bit better. You can see the scopes now a little bit better. Okay, good. Where shall we start? I put a few things in the description. I don't know if you guys got a chance to look at it. There are several things I do want to cover, and I don't know where to start. I guess let's start with the one that probably occupies me the most right now. It is the kickoff of the new high-end tactical comparison. A high-end tactical comparison that is essentially kicking off because the new Schmidt & Bender 6-36, this guy, has finally made it here. I have not shot with it yet. I've spent quite a lot of time looking through it and moving the turrets around and all that while it's on a tripod. The way normally I try to shoot a little bit before I do anything else with the scope, but the fundamental problem right now is that I live in the Southwest. It's approximately 8,000 degrees in the shade outside right now, and my motivation to make it out to the range more than once a week is somewhat limited. So I'm starting up with a basic look at the optics and things like that, and at the feel. The tracking I'm gonna do at a later point. One of the things I like to do, I usually don't need it with the fancy scopes, but I usually don't test tracking until I've had a chance to twist the turrets around a fair bit, shoot with a scope, subject it to recoil, and all sorts of stuff for 2 reasons. One is that once in a while there are some manufacturing defects that just smooth out from moving the turrets around. Once again, usually not in this price range. And then if something changes, I have to redo everything, essentially letting the scope settle in. Another, which also happens, is that if it all works great, but then you subject it to some recoil, mechanical stress, and things like that, and again, everything changes, and tracking can change, holding zero can change, and all that sort of stuff. So I essentially go through this sort of a break-in period for the scopes and for the mounts. Mounts is another thing we should probably talk about at some point. So if there's time, if you guys are interested, something I can touch on. I realize that I do something when I mount scopes that other people don't, so that may be useful. Mr. Drew Morgan is here. Well, howdy to you, sir, as well. Okay. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water. And get things going. The Schmidt 6-36 and Tangent 7-35 are really the 2 primary reasons I'm doing this high-end tactical comparison. John is here. John, good to see you here. So since John put it on Facebook, I assume it's reasonably public. John's mother passed away a very short time ago after a long battle with dementia. And John, you have my condolences. I'm very sorry for your loss, and I hope you're healing well. Yeah, speaking of people passing away, one of my neighbor's one of my neighbor's kids, a 15-year-old teenage boy, went jet skiing past weekend. Somehow, I don't know the details, lost control of the jet ski, hit his head in a rock, ended up dying in the local university hospital ICU on Tuesday morning, 15 years old. Just absolutely tragic. All right. On to happier topics. Fancy scopes, right? Okay. Let's talk about fancy scopes. Fancy scopes don't seem all that important somehow in the grand scheme of things. Imagine that. I don't know if you can see it. It's hot. I'm sweating. AC is not running for some reason. I don't know why. So Schmidt and Tangent are new. Tangent's probably going to be, actually, I don't know how much it is, probably around $6,000, something like that. The new Schmidt is actually coming in under $5,000, and it looked like it was originally posted for more, but then price dropped a little bit. That's a good thing. Schmidt has been running very, very high in price for a little while. And if you sneak in a scope like this under $5,000, and that essentially means that you want to compete, because your primary competitors will be Tangent Data, Zero Compromise scopes like that. And most of those are in the 5K range. I have the Tangent Data 5 to 25. That has been essentially my reference standard for that category. It doesn't mean it is the best scope for everyone. It's a very, very well-rounded design. So anything new that comes up should really be compared against the Tangent, and it should really be compared against the March 5 to 42. That should be here somewhere. I don't see it. Okay. And one step lower in price is the Vortex Razor Gen 3 6 to 36 by 56, which I also have here. Okay. So at around 3K, I think the Vortex is a reference standard. At around 4.5 or whatever it costs right now, the Tangent, I think, is a reference standard, and whatever new that comes up needs to be compared against these two. And the March that pushes the reactor ratio a little bit more is a smaller, lighter scope and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. The Tangent shipped today, so it's going to arrive here next week. Unfortunately, I'll be traveling next week, but the week afterwards, I'll be able to have it in hand. So if all goes well, in 2 weeks, I'll be able to do this again and give you a little bit of an update. My initial take on the Schmidt is generally extremely positive. And what I say by extremely positive, I mean, it's just a really nice scope. And I don't want to say it's unexpected, because it's Schmidt, and I expect them to make a nice scope. But I saw, for the past 2 years, they were bringing sort of prototypes of this scope to SHOT Show. And they were, they were reasonable, but they did not exactly, in my opinion, set the world on fire. And this scope is really nice. Looking through it, it's very comfortable. Box is extremely forgiving. Per my request, Schmidt set it up with their grid reticle, GR2ID reticle, which I happen to like. I think on balance, it is the best grid type reticle on the market today. So there's a difference between a grid type reticle and a tree type reticle. Grid type reticles essentially have horizontal and vertical structures in the tree, so that the whole thing kind of looks like squares. Tree type reticle has wind holes of all sorts, but does not add vertical structures. It may not be a huge distinction, but in practical use, it is a significant distinction. So of the grid type reticles, this is my favorite. Every time I look at it, and I design reticles for people, right? Every time I look at it, I go like, okay, if I were designing a reticle of this style, what would I change? And in the end, it also always comes out to be very, very little, because it is a very nice reticle. And one of the things that Schmidt did really, really well, they made this reticle so that the primary aiming point is very well defined, and you never miss it. And the grid itself while it gives you a lot of hold points and it's reasonably visible, they sized it just right so that when you're not looking for it, it does not really interfere with your vision all that much. Interestingly, Horus, and I have, as most of you probably know, fairly intense dislike of most Horus reticles. One of the early reticles, it's called H425, I think. I have it in a fixed power 10x US optics scope. It's actually really good, and style-wise, I think it is the best reticle Horus has ever done. And then I'm assuming they decided that it worked too well, and I had to screw it up in some way, and that's how we got H59 and all the tremor reticles and all that crap. But grid reticle is very good. The turrets, Mr. James Buzz the Clown is here. Good to see you, sir. The turrets on the Schmidt are the DT2 Plus. These are the locking turrets. So there's little levers here. So you can run it with MTC clicks or without, or locked. These are dual turn, 50 milliradian per turn turrets. I think this is the best turret that Schmidt has ever made. And these have very nice feel. Interestingly, I had these same turrets in the Schmidt Ultra Short 5-20 that I was using for a fair amount of time, quite a few months. And I think on the Ultra Short, the feel of the turrets was slightly better, but I don't tell them side by side. It's hard to compare. But these are actually quite nice. But that's one of the reasons why I generally do tracking a lot of other things after I've spent some time with a scope, because honestly, a good amount of time I'm going to spend basically just doing this. Just moving it around, trying to see if the field changes, if the thing breaks in, that kind of stuff, right? And we all should do that. It's a thing that I find very amusing. Joe Ray, Cyclops Joe, you probably know Joe. He's a good and funny guy. He does this thing that he calls a nipple twister when he takes the turrets of the scope and start twisting them all over the place and all that sort of stuff. That's actually good for scopes, right? That way you break in. You may break everything in, distribute the grease, make sure that if there is any machining non-uniformities there, that they are broken in and all that sort of stuff. So it's not really hard for scopes, but it really looks cool in video. So when I started looking at the Schmidt, just looking at it optically, one thing I noticed was that the field of view appeared to be a little bit narrower than I remembered from looking at it during SHOT Show earlier in the year. So I went and hit the Schmidt & Bender website, and I'm going to pull it up and show you what I mean. Where is it? There I go, Schmidt & Bender website. And on it, it turns out that I'm not crazy. Well, okay, let me rephrase this. It's entirely possible that I am crazy, but not for this reason. It's actually probable that I am crazy, but once again, and not for this reason. Where is that thing? 6-36. That's interesting. Why do I not see it? I'm looking at the Schmidt website, and among the PM2 scopes, oh, there we go. So it's called PM2 High Performance. I'm assuming it's the new product line designation for them. The scopes with the 6-axis arrector system, and where are the specs? Technical data. Here we go. All right. Here we go. I am going to share this thing so you can see. There we go. Let's make sure we can see it. All right. You should be able to see the specs. This is straight from Schmidt website. I hope you can see my mouse. Notice it says field of view in meters and field of view USA, and it is narrow. At first I thought maybe they're listing it as narrow because it's 100 meters in Europe and 100 yards in USA, and yards a little bit less than meters. But if you do some arithmetic, it's a 17% difference, 18%, something like that. And it's too big of a difference to be accommodated by simply looking at yards versus meters. Okay. I know there have been some issues with a patent that Swarovski filed about a decade ago. And I know there were some issues between Swarovski and Leica because of it, but I never really looked into details. More than one company asked me for some information that I was assuming they were trying to prepare defense against that particular patent, but I never paid too much attention to it. I knew Leica that went to court with Swarovski, but that's all I knew. When I looked at the field of view restriction for US only, I thought maybe it has something to do with it. I pinged Schmidt and asked them why there's a restriction. They said it has something to do with a patent. So they didn't specify which patent it is. I went and did a little bit more digging, and I found this Swarovski patent and read it. It is a giant, stinking, insane pile of manure. How that patent was granted is beyond me. They must have found a patent examiner who was drunk, high, retarded, blind, deaf. I don't know. It's completely nuts. The patent essentially says that any rifle scope with the erector ratio, magnification ratio of more than 4 times, meaning 4:16 is 4 times. So if it's more than that, if it's 4:20, that's 5 times, or 4:24 is 6 times. This scope is 6:36. That's a 6-time erector ratio. So any rifle scope with a 6-time erector ratio and apparent field of view of more than 22 degrees is infringing on a Swarovski patent. Apparent field of view is real field of view you see through a rifle scope times magnification. Let's see. That's horseshit, basically. So what this means is that Swarovski somehow managed to patent a specification. And you can't do that. That's why you do many different aspects of software you cannot patent, etc. If you want a good equivalent, I was chatting with a friend of mine. He came out with this analogy. So, but 22 degrees is not a small number for the field of view. It's not field of view, it's apparent field of view. It's basically what the eyepiece projects to your eye, right? If your scope is on 1 power, field of view, real field of view, and apparent field of view are the same. If your scope is on 2 power, your real field of view is twice narrower than apparent field of view. That's how magnification works. Okay, 22 degrees is not small, but there are plenty of rifle scopes on the market that exceed that apparent field of view. There is some verbiage there. It has to maintain that apparent field of view across all magnification ranges, I think. That means that, it has to be a scope that doesn't tunnel and that has that magnification ratio and that field of view. There are a ton of scopes that infringe on this pattern. Swarovski doesn't do anything about it, but I have a suspicion. Once again, this one is unconfirmed, and I'm going to try to confirm it. This one is unconfirmed. That Swarovski just, cares about other European companies, and that's why they had this kerfuffle with Leica. And it's entirely possible that they basically informed Schmidt and Bender that they can't do it. If you want a good analogy, what this means is that imagine that Ford came out with an engine that with a car that has a 10-speed transmission and makes 300 horsepower. Okay, and that would mean, and patented it somehow, and that would mean that any other manufacturer with a 10-speed transmission cannot have a car with a horsepower that's more than 300, right? Or cannot have an 11-speed transmission with a 300 horsepower engine, right? So it's basically a combination of performance specifications, and you cannot patent that. From a business standpoint, on one hand, good for Swarovski that they found some retard in the patent office to prove that, right? But on the other hand, it's really anti-competitive, and it also means that companies who don't want to deal with Swarovski is a comparatively litigious company, best I can tell, don't want to deal with it, and they just throttle the specs. To the best of my knowledge, this patent was not challenged in the US in court. My best guess, once again, I'm making a guess. A lot of this is guesswork on my part, right? So I have to be very clear. And I'm going to try to get to the bottom of this. If I'm making a guess, Swarovski does not want to go to court over this in the United States because they know the patent's not going to hold up. It's not as clear-cut as I think it should be, because there were two court cases between, or I guess two parts of the same litigation between Leica and Swarovski. That one was in UK and Wales, and another one is in European Union. And in the European Union, if I'm reading, I found those court cases. In the European Union, if I'm reading this correctly, the judge basically threw this patent out and said this is bullshit, which is correct. But in UK Wales, they must have found a judge who was the cousin of the retarded patent examiner who granted it, and he upheld the patent. So best I can tell, in UK Wales it's valid, but in Europe it was overturned. That probably means that Schmidt and Bender can sell their full field of view version of this 6-36 rifle scope in Europe, Australia. I actually don't know what they do in UK. I'm very curious. But it sounds like they chose not to fight this. They chose not to fight this in the US. Okay, that's a question. So they have a way of measuring that. Lens dimensions, biggest ruler. It's one of the specifications. Yeah, it's very easy to measure. The simplest way is to basically take a camera, put it up behind the eyepiece, take an image, count how many pixels, you know what each pixel sees, and you can calculate the field of view. For all practical terms, the apparent field of view, I'm going to take a small prismatic here just to show you, right? So basically, there is certain size to the image in front of you. So the angular size of this image, as it presents itself to your eye, is your apparent field of view. Okay. For example, this is a 5-power scope, has a real field of view. What the scope sees times 5 makes for apparent field of view. It's a very, very common optical specification. It's not super commonly used for rifle scopes, but it is very, very commonly used for spotting scopes and binoculars. It's basically a core spec, right? There's no mystery to it. And when I calculated the apparent field of view for this new gotcha, that makes sense. Excellent. Yeah, if it doesn't, let me know. I'll try to explain better. That's why there's a blackboard behind me. I have a piece of chalk and I can draw it out. When I calculated the apparent field of view of the Schmidt, it comes out to 21.7 degrees. So just under that 22-degree cutoff that Swarovski's patent states. In Europe, the apparent field of view of this 6-36 Schmidt scope is around 25 degrees. Okay, and it is significantly wider, and it's a somewhat more pleasing image. Now, in the grand scheme of things, this is an amazing scope, right? And AFV, Joe Morgan AFV is very common for telescope eyepieces. Correct. It's a very common optical specification for rifle scopes. Like I said, it's not used as commonly, but on the industry side, that's one of the things we always talk about. One of the big things, for example, March 5-42 has an 8.2 time erector ratio and the apparent field of view of 26 degrees. March 4.5-28 by 52 has a 6.3 time erector ratio and apparent field of view of 25 degrees. The tangent is a 5-time erector ratio, and I think it's a 23 or 24, 23.5 degree apparent field of view. The Razor Gen 3 is also, I think, a 23.5 degree apparent field of view and 6 times erector ratio. So it seems like Swarovski, if my guess is correct, and there was a nasty letter from a lawyer from Swarovski, right? So all of this is conjecture. I'm making some educated guesses, but they are guesses. It sounds like Swarovski mostly cares about other European companies because they had these couple lawsuits with Leica, and I'm assuming Leica didn't go to court just because they had nothing better to do. There was some sort of somebody had to fire the first shot, and it's usually whoever holds the patent, right? I don't know for sure what to make out of this, right? I keep on thinking about this. And Swarovski are they're not doing anything illegal. They are very much within their right to write a patent, whichever way they want, try to get it past the patent examiner. And if they do defend their intellectual property, right, there's nothing illegal about it. That's what they want to do, okay. But as a consumer, as a potential customer, and honestly, as a guy who spends a lot of time recommending things to people, I don't have to like it because I think this is unprofessional. If you truly invent something, and Lord knows Swarovski makes very, very nice rifle scopes, binoculars, and spotting scopes, and I'm sure they filed plenty of perfectly valid patents. This is just, in my opinion, not one of them. So just like Swarovski very much is within their own rights to try to get this patent, and once they got it, to enforce it in whichever way they see fit, right? Like I said, once again, I think they are not suing, I don't know, let's say Vortex or Night Force for it because in the US, because they know there is a very high chance they're going to lose. It could be also because it's a European thing and they don't think of Vortex, Night Force, whoever as their competitors, but they think of Schmidt and Bender alike as their competitors. It could just be the general purpose European arrogance. Who the hell knows? But once again, I don't have to like it, and I don't have to. I don't, as a consumer, as a guy who makes recommendations, I get to choose what's important to me and what's not, right? So there are plenty of people out there, for example, that will not buy a Chinese product because of Chinese business practices, right? And I have plenty of Chinese products, so perhaps there is some sort of a little bit of hypocrisy on my part. But because the Chinese do steal a lot of IP, but on the other hand, with rifle scopes, I don't think the Chinese are infringing on people's patents all that much. They're trying to make things cheaply, and this is not exactly cutting edge technology. To me, this business with the Swarovski patent reeks of a fairly large company. Swarovski Optic is not a huge company, but their parent company, with the crystals and not, is quite large. And even Swarovski Optic is a good-sized company. So Leica is also, I think, a good-sized company. Maybe, I don't know if they're as big as Swarovski or not, hard to say. Schmidt is not a big company. They don't do binoculars and don't do spotters. They only do rifle scopes. They do them really well. So if I was Schmidt and I was threatened by Swarovski that they'll drag me to court, it's entirely possible I do the same thing. And if this was real technology, real innovation patented by Swarovski, I would have no issues with it. But I think this is not it. I think they basically just got a blatantly invalid patent past a lazy patent examiner and are trying to take advantage of it. And that, if that comes, so I'll do more digging. I'm not fully done. Everything you heard right now, most of it is conjecture. All I know is that the difference field of view is due to a patent of some sort. I sent the exact patent to the guy at Schmidt I know, but I don't know how technical he is. I don't know if he'll confirm or not. But if I'm able to confirm that this is indeed the case, I'm basically going to go completely scorched earth on everything Swarovski and Kahles. Swarovski and Kahles is the same company. Swarovski and Kahles employees in North America did nothing wrong, not their fault, all the usual disclaimers. But as a company, I don't think it's a tactic that I approve of. I don't think it's a tactic that I can easily reconcile. And more importantly, that means that we in the United States can't get a product with a full performance envelope because Swarovski decided to enforce a completely invalid patent. If all of that turns out to be accurate, I will remove all Swarovski and Kahles products from my list of recommendations. I will not review, touch, or recommend any of their products ever again. And if anybody ever asks me why I do not do anything with Swarovski or Kahles, I will explain why. I will not go and scream from the rooftops and try to badmouth them, whatever. This is how they want to do business. More power to them. But I will absolutely shun anything and everything related to Swarovski and Kahles. I will do this to the point for my day job. For one of the systems we do, we buy Swarovski reticle spotting scopes, and that stops today, right? We've bought several of these $5,000 spotters from them. They will be no more. We are done. If my suspicions, if my guesses are accurate, as far as I'm concerned, Swarovski and Kahles no longer exist. Okay. All right, stay tuned on that. Once again, like I said, I'm going to do some digging. I'm going to try to figure out if this is accurate or not, and I will act according from there. If it turns out that my suspicions and guesses are not accurate, I will be back here in the exact same spot. I will issue a retraction and apologize. But until then, we'll see how it goes. Just to be clear, Swaro has not enforced this patent in parts other than EU yet. So I don't know if they've tried to enforce it or not. I know that I have not been able to find a court case in the United States around this patent. I found a court case in the European Union, and I found another one in the United Kingdom. United Kingdom, Swarovski prevailed. In European Union, Leica prevailed. That is probably why Schmidt can sell these 6-36 scopes. Probably, not necessarily. Once again, I don't have all the private details. That is probably why Schmidt can sell the scope of the 25-degree apparent field of view in Europe, but cannot in the United States. That's my best guess. Okay. Is this all making sense to you guys? Do you think I'm being unreasonable? I'm very curious to see what your take on this is. I can find and put, if you guys want to see the patent, I can put a link in the video description or in one of the comments if you wish. There you go. I actually have it open. I'm going to put it in the chat box if one of you feels like perusing it, you can. But basically, the name of the patent, field of view and large magnification. I'm like, you've got to be shitting me. There you go. It's in the chat box. Should be coming. There you go. Okay. Mr. Chen goes 100% reasonable. Yes. Okay. So to be fair, if I see somebody blatantly ripping off somebody's protected IP, I don't like it either. And I act accordingly. I deal with quite a few companies that do some manufacturing in China. And honestly, within this rifle scope world, there's a lot of copying per se, but not necessarily copying of protected IP. With China, with other things they do, there's a lot of blatant IP theft, and I absolutely do not support it. And not just China, many other places. But this one, for some reason, just sets my teeth on edge because it's such a bad patent. All right. Mr. have no idea how to pronounce it. That's some bullshit. When you say some bullshit, you mean what I'm saying or what Swarovski, or what I think Swarovski is doing? Okay, I'll wait for that answer. Before I move on to a few other things that occupy my mind, other optics and all that, anything else on this? Any other questions right now about the new Schmidt? Since I haven't spent a ton of time with it, but I've spent some time with it. I do have some idea of how this thing works. Anything I can address and answer now before we switch gears? Going once. Going twice. With this being the case, better to go tangent? Not necessarily. It remains to be seen. Field of view is just one of the parameters of the scope. There's a lot more to it. And until I spend Until I spend some more time with it, I really don't know. I've done minimal side-by-side, and the field of view of the Schmidt and Bender of the 6-36, it's not a narrow field of view per se. For comparison, it's essentially identical field of view to zero compromise scopes. Excuse me. It's actually interesting. So zero compromise. One of the zero compromise guys dislike me intensely, as honestly do Kahles and Swarovski. Kahles and Swarovski dislike me before this. If they see this, they'll probably dislike me even more, which is okay, But I like zero compromise scopes, and honestly, I like Swarovski and Kahles scopes within reason. So I'm gonna have to rethink my recommendations because of this, which is a shame. In some categories, I think, especially for some hunting scopes, Swarovski scopes are really excellent. But anyhow, one of the things that annoys me with zero compromise is that for every single one of their rifle scopes, the specification that they list is not accurate. The actual field of view is about 4 or 5% lower than what they list in their specs. And I've called them out on it a couple of times. I've quietly told them that a couple of times when they were still talking to me, that they need to fix that. They ignored it. I said it out publicly. They decided to yell at me a little bit for that and a couple other things. And to date, they still haven't changed their specs. So zero compromise is bullshitting on their specifications. The actual field of view is narrower and identical to the Schmidt. And zero compromise rifle scopes do very well. People are very happy with them. So this size of field of view and apparent field of view is perfectly viable. It's not narrow. But when we're talking about rifle scopes in this price and performance range, everything matters. All of these rifle scopes are very, very good. So if this is indeed driven by a threat of lawsuit from Swarovski, essentially Schmidt is ending up being disadvantaged because of this insane patent that I can't imagine how it can be valid, right? Oh, it's like the Apple patented an iPhone shape, essentially, right? Imagine that Apple patented a smartphone with a 6-inch diagonal screen and a particular clock speed of the processor. And any other cell phone with a screen that size or bigger with a processor that fast or faster infringes on the IP. That's equivalent, right? Now, I put a link in a patent. You guys go read it. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something, right? I'm not a patent attorney, so take that for what it is. But to me, it is completely nuts. Okay. Drew. Companies who lie with respect to technical specs are the worst, and blatant lying in other industries. I've seen a bunch of it. I intensely dislike it. The part that annoys me with the CEO is that I mentioned it, I called them out on it. They yelled at me. They didn't change the specs. So yeah, it is what it is. But I wonder if they are keeping the field of view the way it is for the same reasons. Remember, the guys at Zero Compromise Optics came out of Kahles. They had some sort of a shake-up, and they all left and started Zero Compromise Optics. So they know very well that Swarovski has this patent, and it's entirely possible Zero Compromise is limiting their field of view for the same exact reasons why Schmidt and Bender is doing it, to avoid a lawsuit by Swarovski. Zero Compromise is a pretty small company, kind of like Schmidt and Bender, probably even smaller. That have not been around for as long. They only make rifle scopes, only very nice ones. For all of my issues with the people at Zero Compromise, I really like the scopes. The scopes are very, very good. It is entirely possible that they're constricting the field of view, and for the same reasons why Schmidt and Bender is doing it. I know I do a lot of disclaimers, but if my guesses are correct and all that sort of stuff. Even if you think the patent does not hold, if you do not have a huge number of resources, you do not want to go through long and costly litigation. A company the size of Swarovski can probably bankrupt a company the size of Zero Compromise or Schmidt. Once again, if my guesses about company sizes are correct. just by dragging them through courts forever and a day, because lawyers are expensive, court proceedings are expensive, and if you have a good lawyer, you're willing to spend the money, they can keep all this stuff going. It probably explains why Swarovski has not been keen on taking on some of the larger companies that have a lot of money, right? So I don't know. It's entirely possible that Zero Compromise has to follow the same patent-wise limitations. Jan is asking, Link is asking, what are some advantages of Schmidt & Bender compared to Razor Gen 3? I don't know yet. I think I'm gonna have to take a rain check on that. Schmidt does have very, very good image quality. It has really impressive turrets. It's a very, very nice scope. One of the questions I need to answer for myself really is, I did this long live stream together with my buddy Will on the Razor Gen 3, and the big point of it is how close Razor Gen 3 is to the true alpha scopes, right? Alpha scopes in this case being Schmidt & Bender, Tangent, Zero Compromise. How close Razor Gen 3 got with a notably lower price. So these are all the things I'm going to be looking at. I can't answer that question with any level of assurance. I think it is better optically in terms of pure image quality and all that sort of stuff. But Razor Gen 3 does have wider field of view. On balance, I think the Schmidt has more sophisticated turrets. They're both very easy to get behind. I was very impressed with how easy the Schmidt is to get behind. The eye box is very good. And that's one of the strengths of Razor Gen 3 and Zero Compromise scopes. Okay, but Razor Gen 3 does it with wide field of view, which is no mean feat. And then on top of it, there is this new Tangent coming, and the direct competitor for the new Schmidt is a Tangent 7-35 that I don't yet have. It shipped today, so it should be here next week. I'm traveling next week. When I come back, I'll grab it. I'll look at them side by side, and I'll tell you what I think. Usually, with rifle scopes in this price and performance range, there's not a huge amount that really sets them apart. It's unusual to really find a dog for this much money from companies this reputable. It will come down to how they to make their compromises, what each company considers more important, how they want to do things, right? Very frequently, it's not what is best necessarily, but what is best for your specific application and for your specific preferences. All right, Mr. R. Heat just became a member. Thank you, sir. Okay. That's that. I think I've reasonably exhausted the topic of Schmidt & Bender and Swarovski and Tangent at this stage. Have you had a look at the new Zeiss S3 6-36? Although it is cheaper, how does it compare to the likes of the Razor Gen 3 Element Theos? I've only looked at it fairly briefly. Optically, it looked very similar, very close to Theos to me. I had Theos next side by side with this Razor Gen 3. Optically, I think Gen 3 was a little bit better, but I actually like the feel of the turrets on the Theos a little bit more. Between the Zeiss S3, Element Theos, and Razor Gen 3, in terms of turret feel, I like the Theos more than the other two. I think the eye box and stuff is somewhat more forgiving on Razor Gen 3. If I were to make a guess, if they did something a little bit different with the eyepiece, I don't think these are. I don't think the Gen 3 is identical design. But Theos and Zeiss, to me, in terms of how the optics are done, look very, very similar. Going to more detail than that without having them side by side is kind of tricky. I had a nice chat with the guys at Zeiss during SHOT Show. I was doing a review where one of the S3 scopes would have been a good fit. I asked them to loan me one. They said, absolutely, it's coming. Give him my address. It never showed up. I did the comparison without it. I don't like to ask people more than once, sometimes twice. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. So when I have a comparison set up that where there's ICS3 is a good fit, I'll ask for it again. Once again, for me, it's not personal. And they can either loan me one or not. If I get enough questions about it, I'll buy one and then sell it when I'm done. But without doing a true side-by-side, there's only so much detail I can give you. Would we have picked up any performance trading a field of view down for US or not really given the optical formula? Well, I mean, a field of view is something that's actually pretty easy to see, right? So when I looked at that scope, it's the first thing that jumped out at me. It had perfectly respectable field of view, but not particularly wide, and you see it. I happen to find field of view fairly important. But the trade-off for field of view, for example, if you restrict the field of view, oftentimes the eye box can become a little bit more forgiving, right? So, and on this Schmidt, eye box is very forgiving. So maybe that's part of the trade-off. If you make a dedicated design and restrict the field of view, it's a little bit easier to make the rifle scope lighter. It's a little bit easier to squeeze in extra adjustment range, things like that. In this case, I would be absolutely shocked if Schmidt designed two separate scopes, one for US and one for the rest of the world. Chances are it's the same design, and somewhere in there, there's a field stop that restricts the field of view. If that is the case, the only benefit from this restricted field of view would probably be a slightly more forgiving eye box, I think. Whether you guys would have picked up on it or no, I can't tell you, right? To me, it looked pretty obvious. I mean, I didn't start digging for all this for shits and giggles, right? It was something that was apparent, and I wanted to figure out why. And once again, I still haven't fully figured out why. I'm just making educated guesses and asking more questions. Okay, let me refill my glass. I'll give it another moment to see if any other questions come up specific to this discussion topic, and I'm going to switch for a moment and talk about binoculars. Okay. Part of this live stream here is supposed to be me giving you guys an update on all the stuff that I've been up to. And unfortunately, I've been traveling so much that I haven't been up to as much as I would like. But one thing that I've been waiting for since SHOT Show that just arrived here, I think, yesterday. And I'm very excited about it. And I am going to show you what it is. Okay. Let's see. Any more questions? No more questions. All right, let's talk binoculars for a moment. I don't do binoculars too much, partly because binoculars that I really want seldom exist. And binoculars that I really want, the ultimate binocular for me would be a high-end binocular with a built-in laser rangefinder and a reticle. For a lot of things I do, even just the reticle is nice. And the binocular that I was really excited to see during SHOT Show earlier this year was the new model from Apex Optics over in Canada. It's a new-ish company, been around for a couple of years now. They seem to be doing all right. This is the version they call, what's it called? Apex Summit, I think. Yeah, this is a Summit Pro. It's a 12 by 50 binocular, 12 power magnification, 50 millimeter objectives. I think it is made in Japan. It's not clear. It just says designed in Canada. If I remember correctly, our conversation in SHOT Show, it was made in Japan by the same company that makes binoculars for 1 million people. And I'm gonna try to find the picture. The reason I got so excited about this thing is that it has a reticle. But high quality, to even decent quality binoculars with reticles are far and few in between. And these guys did something very Here you go. I found the page for it. I'm going to share that. These guys did something that was actually intelligent. They did not go crazy with the reticle. They simply gave us the little bit that we need without flooding the field of view with mindless bullshit. Okay. All right, see this little structure? It's in the left barrel of the binocular. It basically gives me a milliradian hash. This little vertex sits just off center of the binocular, and we get 12 milliradian of vertical and horizontal ranging. If I'm spotting for someone, I can call out hits. If my laser rangefinder went down, I can range with the reticle, at least get some reasonable idea of where we are. The reticle rotates. So what happens is there is a collar here, and if you change your interpupillary distance, if the reticle was fixed, it would start changing angles. So you can adjust the reticle orientation to rotate it so that it is level with your field of view. The right barrel is where you do eyepiece adjustment. The focusing knob is very nice and smooth. Okay, and the reason why I think it is likely to be a Japanese binocular is that there is a patent out there on this rotating reticle business. Okay. On this rotating reticle business and a binocular, I know which company holds it. I am quite confident it has not yet expired. So there is a really, really high probability that that's the company making this binocular. Looking on the Apex website, I don't see them mentioning which company makes it anywhere, which OEM does it for them. So since they are not mentioning it, I am not going to. I'm not going to say it either. Okay. The version, so the Summit 2D binoculars, the whole line is new for them. There's 10 by 42 and 12 by 50. With 12 by 50, there are two versions, presumably one with a reticle, one without. The version with the reticle costs fairly reasonable, given this is actually pretty nice. Fairly reasonable, $850. The funny thing is that my buddy Will, who was there with me visiting Apex during SHOT Show, they told me how much they were going to charge for it. I called them lunatics and told them to charge more. Right. So people tend to dislike it when I suggest that something should be costing more. Drew Morgan, that's pretty cool. I've been looking for competitors for Vortex 836 RT. So Vortex 8x36 is a perfectly reasonable little binocular, but this is definitely a higher end thing. Steiner makes a 10 by 50 Poro prism binocular that has a laser rangefinder and a reticle, and I really like that binocular. It was originally about $3,000. I saw it not long ago for under two. It's still what was a little bit of a showstopper for me. Well, there are two things. One was that with the laser rangefinder, they didn't have an angle, inclination indicator, which for me is a little bit of a problem. I find that to be a very, very useful feature. Another thing, it's this military style binocular, and for military binoculars, what they do, rather than have these click adjustable eye cups like on this guy, they have these rubber fold down eye cups. And the way my eyes are shaped, so my eyes are not very deeply set, and those eye cups don't work all that well for me. I have a couple binoculars like that. I can use them, but it's not super comfortable, and definitely not particularly comfortable when you're at fairly high magnification. Magnification is the other factor that makes this one important. It's 12 power. The model that we've all been waiting and asking for was somewhere between 12 to 15 magnification with the reticle, and hope with the laser rangefinder. Even just the reticle and a 12 power binocular is a very, very good step. Once again, I only got the binocular yesterday, so I have not had a chance to spend too much time with it. I spent a little bit of time using it handheld and off of a surface at 12 power. I think it will do its best work off of a tripod. Out on the front, there's a little cap here that covers a 1/4-20 socket to use with the tripod adapters. I am quite hopeful that this binocular will do well. I'll spend a lot of time with it over the next few months and see how it holds up. At first blush, it's pretty comfortable to hold. Image quality looks quite nice. I like the reticle. Focusing knob is very nice. So it's likely punching a little bit above its weight class, but where it really sits, once again, this is just the first look. I'll spend a lot of time with it. But I'm very happy to see it. I hope Apex does well with it. And the way marketing at a lot of optics companies works, a lot of the marketing people are very risk averse. I think it's a nice way of saying it. Fucking morons is probably very impolite. I think risk averse is good. And because they're so risk averse, boy, am I going to get hate mail for this? Because they're so risk averse, they're basically waiting for somebody else to take the risk. And if product looks to be successful, all of a sudden there's going to be 20 copycat models flooding the market going after the same customer. That probably would not be great for Apex if they get a lot of competition, but it would prove me right that there is a market here for a binocular with a reticle. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a small niche. Maybe it's enough for Apex to fill that niche, and there isn't going to be too much. But I do know that Bushnell has a 15 power binocular with a reticle. Once again, I've only seen it with a shot. It actually looked okay. But I think this one on balance looks to be better. And we'll see. We'll see how it does. I am, for now, it's a nice way of saying this. Let's say I'm cautiously optimistic. Okay. All right. Questions on binoculars? Really, anything I've covered up to this moment, or should I move on to the next topic du jour? Yay, nay, anything, maybe. All right. I think I'm putting you guys to sleep. I'm looking at the number of people on the live stream, and it's been slowly declining. I think my wife says that listening to me talk is the best cure for insomnia that she has found yet. The family joke is that we've been married for almost 20 years. And today she still does not know what I do for a living. Not because she's not interested and not because I don't try to explain it to her, but usually on the third sentence she's out and asleep. So maybe I'm putting you guys to sleep as well. All right. So Apex Summit Pro binoculars, 12x50. Give me a little bit of time to mess with them, and if it works well, I hope many of you will go and buy it and prove to optics companies that this is a type of a product that the market wants. Okay. What else was I going to talk about? I had this whole description set up. I wanted to talk a little bit about offset and piggybacked on others red dot sites. Let me see what else I had, and I want to talk about precision scopes. I'm going to do another article on MPVOs because I have a Swamp Fox Warhawk 2-10x44 here, which I rather like. So that's going to be an interesting design. Okay, there's another thing that I wanted to talk about, and I forgot to bring it with me. It's in my workshop. So I'm gonna back off on that one. I'll do a video and you guys will see it. That topic is the new Gunwerk's Elevate Bipod. It's I did a brief write-up for it on my website. It's an ultra lightweight, ultra compact, double pull bipod that weighs 12 ounces and goes from about 4-inch elevation to about 19. So no Swaro binos, no. Funny thing with Swaro binos, I don't particularly like Swarovski binoculars. They give me a headache. In the older days, Swarovski SLC New for the long time was my favorite binocular. Then they went to the ELs, different versions of Swaro Vision, and they make it a very, very flat image. And to me, the edge is overcorrected. To me, it's an unnatural looking image, and it gives me a headache. It's technically wonderful. Like it's a technical achievement, but just doesn't agree with my eyes. If you're looking for a high-end binocular, So the big three are really Swarovski, Leica, and Zeiss, and the choice between them usually comes down to personal preferences. For my eyes, probably the best binocular I've ever seen was Leica Noctivid 8x42. But I'm very particular about binoculars. I prefer somewhat larger objectives as we go up in power. Like I don't like 10x42s too much. I like 10x50s. So my primary binocular that I've been using is a Vortex Razor UHD 10x50. It's not quite as nice as a Leica Swarovski, but it's good enough to where I'm not constantly driven to look for something better. Where these 12 power Apex is going to fit is not yet clear. I don't think it's as nice as a Razor UHD, but it is a nice binocular. And what I'm trying to determine is that, it's for $850. I don't expect it to be optically as nice as $1,900 Razor or $3,000 Leica or Swarovski. But is it good enough to where it does what I need without giving me a headache and without me wishing for something else? And I can't answer that question yet. All right. What was it? Bipod. So I forgot to bring the freaking bipod. Shame on me. I'm gonna do a separate video on it. I'll post it up. I'm really impressed with it. It's lightweight. It's fairly sturdy. It's very adaptable. Has several different splay angles, which is very cool. And it has double pull, so you can make small adjustments, big adjustments. It's not quite tall enough to be a sitting bipod for me, but it is absolutely tall enough to accommodate pointing up, pointing down, and all sorts of other things that can be important in the field. It is unabashedly a fully featured hunting bipod. It's not a type of a bipod. It's it's sturdy, but it's not as beefy as a lot of competition bipods are, where the requirements are different. But for hunting distances, it's absolutely plenty. There's plenty for me, and it's sitting on my 308 fix, and I'll be hunting with it this season. That's likely to be the rifle I take with me on a pronghorn hunt. It's between that and my 280 Remington, and I'm leaning toward the fix. So. Okay, last pre-prepared topic was an offset red dot sights, and I have a couple of examples here. These are, I know it's a very different thing. If this is not what you guys want covered in the same live stream as Precision Optics, please tell me, and I'll save this for later. But until then, so I've got two small prismatics here from Primary Arms. This is a new 5-power SLX, and they have a separate mount here where you can put a red dot sight that's piggybacked. Okay, and I've had this for a long time now. I have a 3-power SLX, also from Primary Arms, and for this one I have a different mount for red dot they make. This one is here. It basically hooks up as a clamp onto the main prismatic, and once it's hooked up, it doesn't wobble. And both of these mounts that Primary Arms make are set up for Glock MOS plates. I am very mixed on whether setting anything up for the Glock MOS plates is all that brilliant of an idea, but it does give you a lot of flexibility. There are a lot of plates out there. On this one, I'm actually using Glock's native plate, which is not great, but on the other hand, on the rifle, it doesn't quite go through as much shock and stress as it does on the reciprocating slide of a handgun, so it might not necessarily be a bad idea. For this guy, Primary Arms actually ships a adapter plate of their own that fits a doctor sight pattern, and this is Primary Arms RS10 red dot that fits it. And this is a better plate than native Glock MOS plates, but they all work. Like with all Glock MOS plates, you have to be very, very careful which length screws you use. There is very, very few threads to work with, and if your screws are a little bit too long, it'll start to cantilever the plate off of the base, and it can bend the plate and all sort of stuff. Ask me how I know. But if you use fairly short screws, and if you are careful and don't push it too much, I think on the carbon applications, it's going to work very, very nicely for me. The question I'm trying to answer for myself is, what is the ideal orientation for a red dot sight. And I'm going to revisit this in a live stream on my website, on my darklordofoptics.com website at some point, because there I can have a live stream with a rifle in my hands and I can show you. Here, if I pick up a gun, YouTube's going to kill the live stream. So we will adjust the best we can. So the traditional way of using a piggybacked red dot sight is that you look from the primary optic, and that would be, your cheek weld. And if your eye is up, you look through the auxiliary optic, and that would be your chin weld. Going up and down, it's kind of a bitch. I've tried it. I've taken a couple of classes that way. I can make it work, but it is a little unnatural. A lot of people who I've seen do this successfully, they basically treat the red dot sight as such a primary sight. They train all their presentation to be right behind the red dot sight. And if they need magnification, the assumption is that it's going to be a more deliberate shot, and they have time to kind of hunker down behind the optic and all that. There's a guy I know who posts on the height. The way he does this, he takes a low power variable, mounts it low, and basically that way the red dot sight is not sitting quite as high, and that's what he does. Red dot sight is a primary, and then he just hunkers down to get to the magnified optic, because that would be a less common situation. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea for several reasons. One of them is that very commonly when you're shooting standing offhand while moving, you really need that red dot sight. And when you have the upright position, your head is naturally a little bit higher up. While if you're trying to make a more precise shot, very frequently you'll be going prone or leaning forward against something. If you do this, one of the things that happens is that your eye drops a little bit with respect to the stock for typical AR-15, etc. So it's not necessarily a bad way of doing this. Previously, I've done this with a prismatic where I can't modulate the height, but the way Primary Arms ships these, this is a spacer, and they have different thickness spacers. This is the thinnest spacer they have, so the height of the optic is comparatively low, but I can also run it completely without a spacer. And I don't know if I can, depending on your face shape, you may or may not be able to. It's something for me to experiment with. One of the things I recently picked up from Matt, the Everyday Marksman, is that if you have a piggyback red dot sight and you don't feel like doing all this gymnastics with raising your head, if you rotate the rifle with it, the red dot sight naturally ends up right in front of your left eye. Right, you rotate it the same way you would if you had an offset sight, and the piggyback sight now is in front of your left side eye. And I've been practicing with that. It's actually not bad at all. It is. I always thought that I have to have the aiming point in front of the dominant eye, and I'm right eye dominant. But because there is no magnification of any sort with the red dot sight, it's actually working adequately well at close distances for me when it is in front of the left eye. I'm going to do some more experimentation with it, and the reason I set up these two optics the way I did is that I'm going to train a little bit, but doing it 3 different ways, right? Piggybacked sight, rotated so that the red dot sight is in front of the left eye, and rotated so that the red dot sight is in front of the right eye. Train a little bit with all 3 methods so that I am reasonably comfortable with them. The most common for me right now is just normal. Basically, this is how most of my guns are set up, some versions of this. Yeah, and after that, I'm going to pull out a timer and just go on the same day, go back and forth and see if there are apparent differences in speed and accuracy within basically CQB ranges, let's say 5 to 20 yards ballpark. That's going to be very interesting to see. For slow fire, I don't care. All of that is viable. But what I care about is speed and accuracy on standard silhouettes at CQB ranges. Okay. So that's that. I think I've talked about Primary Arms 3 power in the past quite a bit. I want to make sure it doesn't fall on the floor. Okay. The 5 power is new to me, and it's surprisingly nice. Tiny little thing. I did a video on 5 power prismatics not long ago. Not on these, I didn't have this one yet. There I talked about Swamp Fox Saber and Vortex Spitfire Gen 2. And I like them both, but for very, very different reasons. With all of the smaller prismatics like this guy, what you're saving compared to low power variable, something like that, is you're saving size and weight, right? This thing is tiny, as is configured with a red dot, extra mount, and all that. I think it is maybe. Oh, I have a scale. I'm actually gonna weigh it. I'll tell you exactly. Hold on. Alrighty, let's see if I have space here. Have a scale. Yeah, I'll set it up and weigh it, and that way I don't have to guess. It should be right. That's interesting. Okay. Right, can you guys still hear me? It tells me active audio input device was unplugged. Is the sound still on? It shows that it should be on. Okay, put something in the chat box if you can still hear me. What you're getting is a much better optical performance for the money, right? Swarovski Sabre is $330, and in terms of image quality, it'll knock the socks off of any low power variable anywhere near that price range. And there is another 5 power large prismatic that should be landing here fairly soon. It's the one from Element Optics. I've mentioned it a couple times in the past. I designed reticles for them, so I'm very curious to see how it's going to do. It's also a large prism design with nice large immersive field of view, decent eye relief, sort of a general purpose take on a 5 power scope, and it also has side focus, so you can do very close distance for dry practice and all that. I have not seen a production version of it yet. I'm hoping to get it soon. In the next next video and article I do on 5 power prismatics is really going to be built to a significant degree over this primary arms as a representative of the small prism family, and the one from Element as a representative of the next generation of the large prism family. Okay. Questions on prismatics, red dots, offset sites, anything like that? Going once, going twice, sold. All right, that's more or less all that I wanted to cover. Just really trying to, should try not to drop anything. Trying to keep you guys up to speed on what I'm up to. There are a few other things that I'm doing, but these are the biggies. I am going to do another comparison for crossover rifle scopes. Basically, the rifle scopes that can be used for precision in a pinch and for Western hunting in a pinch. Probably in parallel with the high-end tactical. All the stuff I do with prismatics and red dots, that's just part of my normal practice. Every time I go shooting, I'm testing something, and then I try to carve out just a little bit of time just to do some general practice. And sometimes it's precision, usually with a rimfire. Sometimes it's AR stuff, trying to shoot reasonably quickly. So all these things I do as my general practice, and in parallel I'll be running a couple of these long comparisons on high-end tactical precision scopes and on the crossover designs. All right, we've been at it for about an hour and 15 minutes. I'll open it up to a general purpose Q&A. Anything that I ever talk about, is a fair game. Anything you want me to weigh in on, now's the time. And if there is nothing, that means I get to have dinner at a reasonable time today. Which not necessarily a bad thing. On one hand, I could use to lose some weight. On the other hand, my sunny dispositions goes to shit when I'm hungry. For the record, what I'm drinking today is Pellegrino. Once again, it's 8,000 degrees in the shade here, and I need water. All right, guys. What do you have for me? I see. Don't all rush in all at once. Lord Almighty. All right, I am okay. Oh, there we go. That's an interesting question. Why does it seem that no one talks about Zeiss S5? It seems like a very good scope. Actually, it is a very good scope. I tested the 3 to 18 version, and I thought it was very nice. Interestingly, and once again, this field of view thing comes up. My only real knock on it was that the field of view is a little bit on the narrow side for the category. I didn't like how huge the turrets were. I think that was probably a better match to the 5 to 25 and then the 3 to 18. But aside from that, 3 to 18 was excellent, and Zeiss does reticle illumination really incredibly well. Why there's not so much talk about it? I don't know. It's hard to say for sure. I think Zeiss introduced the S3, and which is a little bit less expensive, so there's probably more volume there. And it's S3 is Japanese scope, S5 they tell me is German. I have my reservations, but I really don't have a reason to question that. All the Zeiss sponsored people seem to have started talking about the less expensive Japanese-made S3 very, very quickly, and I don't see them talking about S5 very much at all. So you're making a good observation now that I think about it. I don't know why. Maybe it's easier for Zeiss to make S3 scopes in quantities. Maybe they think maybe their margins are better because they're building it in Japan. For the S5, the competition is very steep. It was in almost the same price range as the comparably configured DCO, if I remember correctly. I'm looking up the price right now just to make sure I'm not bullshitting. Where's Malhai? There we go. So Zeiss S5, 5 to 25. Yeah, it's about $4,000. So you're within spitting distance of the more established zero compromise. Zero compromise. Let's see. I'm looking at zero compromise also at Mile High yet within a couple $100 over, depending on the reticle. Tremor reticle is a little bit more expensive. With good reticles, it's yeah. So Zeiss and zero compromise, Zeiss S5 and zero compromise are within a couple $100 of each other. And I don't know which is a better scope. I think I had the ZCO 4 to 20 more or less the same time, and I thought that ZCO was slightly better, but we're pretty close. My best guess is that there's just a lot of competition, and maybe Zeiss has less of a margin on S5 scopes. S3 seems to be what they want to push at the moment. The basic, another basic problem was that at the same time I also had the Tangent 3 to 15, and it was just better optically overall, I think, than ZCO or Zeiss, and that was the 30mm tube model was in that. That was also in that $3,800 range. So there we go. Yeah, but for brand. So yeah, just stiff competition. There's Tangent 3 to 15 by 50, zero compromise 4 to 20 by 50, and then Zeiss right in there, 3.6 to 18 by 15, and it's just a tough competitive market. I don't know how many they sell. I don't know if they're having supply chain issues. I'm trying to see if they're in stock or not. Yeah, they're in stock. MOI model in stock. Milleradian model is not at Europtic. But Europtic is the less expensive. Okay. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I think it's just competition. I think I have a handheld 4 to 16 I love. Yeah, I really like those. So those older handhelds I really liked. The 4 to 16 by 56 and 3 to 12 by 56 on balance. It was a funny thing when Hansel developed, 3.5 to 26 by 56. It was like $7,000, and everybody went ape shit over it. And I've looked at that scope multiple times. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I think the 4 to 16 on balance was probably the best precision scope that Hensoldt ever made, especially a little bit later. They made a new version of it with updated turrets, and I think that was just awesome. 3 to 12 was probably a little bit easier to get behind in terms of eye box and all that, although 4 to 16 was also very, very good. And it was a lot of capability in a fairly short optic, not very heavy. I think if Hensoldt cared about civilian market, they could do really well. They had very solid core designs. The reticles were a little bit outdated. Excuse me. Reticles were a little bit outdated because it was so focused on the military market. Outside of that, they were excellent scopes. Okay. I need to find a tissue. Give me a sec. All right. What else? What else we got, guys? Oh, another thing I didn't mention. I did a short on it. So FX makes air guns and stuff, but they are the parent company for Element Optics. FX has had a small Doppler radar chronograph for air guns and for bows and arrows and stuff for a little while now. I have one that you can see it from here. They made a larger version to compete presumably against Lab Radar that they are calling Pro Shooting Chronograph, something like that. So I got one a couple of weeks ago. Let me make sure I'm not screwing up the name. Used to be able to remember these things, and I got married, had kids. Now I haven't slept for about 12 years. My ability to retain names and model numbers. True ballistic chronograph. This thing kicks ass. There is some question about some of the decisions they made. They do this BC calculation that is basically just specific to that day, that bullet, and all that. There are a few other things, but fundamentally, all I want from a chronograph is to give me the accurate velocity on that day. Do so with minimal setup, and I'll take care of the rest. It does do proper ballistics for you and all sorts of stuff, and I have a strong suspicion that will develop it further than that. But one of the things I also know is that with Lab Radar and a lot of other things, it's always been a little bit of a shit show trying to get that thing properly set up and triggered and make sure it sees your shots and all that. With this FX True Ballistic Chronograph, I opened it from the box, looked at it carefully. There's a USB-C port. I plugged it in to charge for a couple hours while I was getting all my other stuff packed up and deciding what I want to do at the range. Threw it in the box, took it to the range, uncorked it, looked at it carefully, never looked at the manual. Took me about 2 seconds to figure out how to set it up. Pointed it downrange, turned it on. Then it triggers on every shot, gives me correct numbers. Compared it, I have two other traditional chronographs, one with the screens, one with magnetospeed. Reasonable agreement. The numbers look perfectly normal. Gives me a ton of data. Love it. It's a game. As far as I'm concerned, it makes all the difference in the world. It ain't cheap. Nice stuff is not cheap, but it was so easy to set up and get going. I was very pleasantly impressed. Okay. Mr. Blind Spotter, I'm late. I assume the Nexus Gen 2 has been discussed. For me, it looks like the perfect do-all scope. I do wonder if the optics will suffer with the higher zoom ratio. Nexus Gen 2 actually has not been discussed. I don't have one here. I've seen it. I don't have one. So Light Optics Works has this new 4 to 25 by 50 design that a lot of people are beginning to use. Element puts it in a 30mm tube. I have one from another company that has not publicly said anything about this one, so I won't either. It's also in a 30mm tube, and it's set up as more with like a Western hunting scope. But really, it's just one of the best hunting reticles I've seen for a long time. The moment they give me the okay, I'll publish the video. Zeiss S3 4 to 25 is the same core design, and then there is tracked toric 4 to 25 by 50, which is, I think, also the same core design as the Zeiss. Zeiss and tracked are 34mm tubes. Element and this other company that the scope already have are 30mm tubes. I've seen them all. I haven't been able to look at them super carefully. I'm definitely gonna get the one from Tracked because of the price. It's $1,500. Zeiss is charging $2,200 for theirs. Nexus, I don't remember, but it's also, I think, a couple of grand. And well, this other company, I actually don't know. I don't know the price. Once they are ready to release, I'll find out. But the versions with the 34mm tube have a ton of adjustments, so they look like extremely promising designs for things like rimfire ALR. And from what I've seen so far with all of these in terms of image quality and stuff like that, they're good. They're actually quite good. Next, so the Gen 1 Nexus, the 5 to 20, image quality is extremely similar to the Gen 2 Nexus, to me at least. At least looks pretty similar, which is not a bad thing. Gen 1 was very good. But except the Gen 2 has a broader magnification range. The interesting question here is that what are the differences between different versions of the scope that come from different versions of the scope that come from different manufacturers? Because what would make you want to pay more, let's say, for Zeiss? What would make you want to pay $800 more for Zeiss than you would for Tracked? Is there really $800 difference there? Is there a difference? Is it the same scope labeled? Is Zeiss doing something different? It's entirely possible they are. I don't know. It didn't look like it to me, but I didn't look at it that carefully. Right? Is there something there to warrant this $800 price difference? And the same question is going to be for the Nexus. So Nexus is in a 30mm tube and it's lighter, so there's that. But outside of that, 30-ounce Nexus with 30mm tube or 40-ounce Tracked with a 34mm tube is, if image quality looks more or less the same, and might not, I don't know. I expect it to be somewhat similar. Why would you want to pay more for the Nexus versus the Tracked? And they might be a good reason for it. One, for example, I know that Nexus from Element has the same basic turret design as they use on the Theos, and these are really nice turrets. I expect these. From what I've seen, I suspect Element of this whole, all of the 4 to 25 scopes that I've seen, I suspect that Element might end up with the best turret. Whether it's worth the price difference for you or not, it depends. But it's a seriously nice turret, so maybe that. I don't know. I'd need to look at them more carefully and see. That's one of the things I want to do with all these crossover type designs. Okay. And on top of it, all of these will be fairly significantly heavier than the Vortex Razor Edge DLHT 4.5 to 22 that I like quite a lot. Right, and another question to answer would be, okay, so all of these versions of the 4 to 25 from Element, Zeiss, Tracked, and this other company, all of these are going to be heavier than the Razor and have larger, bolder, arguably more sophisticated turrets with probably better feel, more elevation per rotation, and all that sort of stuff, right? But 10 to 20 ounces heavier. If you are putting this on a Western hunting rifle, is that enough of a difference? Is there a difference with image quality? I don't know. But it is something I'm going to explore. That's the crossover scope comparison that I've been talking about. Any update on Hyper 7? Will it hit the market? Yeah, it's more almost ready. So Hyper 7 is designed to work with Element's new ballistic app. The app for iPhone is already done. The app for Android they're wrapping up with. And the moment they release the Android app, that's when they'll start shipping Hyper 7. It's pretty much ready. So soon. William Brown, opposite Nordic thing. Laney College in CA. So CA is California or Canada. Is making optical flats out of non-aluminum mirror blanks. I'm not sure what this refers to. There are a lot of mirrors out there that are not aluminum. I mean, for my day job, we use mirrors all the time, and 90% of them are not made out of aluminum blanks. If you really want very high wavefront accuracy, you can't really make it out of aluminum. You have to do it out of various glass substrates. And the choice there's all sorts of borosilicate glass. There is zero dur for low thermal expansion, silane. There are quite a few. So I'm curious. I've never heard of Laney College. If they're making optical flats, I'm probably going to look it up. I'm curious. I'm always looking for sources for new optical flats, but for me, the bigger problem is off-axis parabolas. Would you mind talking about what should be considered for a good low-light optic and what should be avoided if possible? Sure, I'll give you kind of a bird's eye overview, but I am going to do probably, as time allows, I want to do 2 or 3 live streams on my recommendations. I have my recommendations kind of fleshed out. I update them once a year or so. They sit on my website, but in the past I've done a couple of videos kind of going over recommendations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a live stream so that I can answer questions. And I'm going to lay out, let's say, hunting scopes for different applications and different price ranges. And low light is kind of a big deal for hunting scopes. The key to high quality, to good performance in low light is having moderate magnification, large objective, and a well-optimized optical design. Right, so there's no mystery there. Classical light scopes would be something like 3 to 12 by 56. Traditionally, Meopta Neostar 1 3 to 12 by 56 has been sort of my perennial recommendation. For a little bit less money, Trigic Acupoint 3 to 12 by 56 is excellent. And the theme here is that it's not a huge amount of magnification and you have a large objective. What it does, it gives you a very large exit pupil. The large objective lets in a lot of light. And if you are shooting in low light, chances are you're not exactly shooting 800 yards away. It's not hunting, hopefully. And that's pretty much what you get. If European companies make 7 by 50, 7 by 56, 8 by 56 rifle scopes, the same basic thing: moderate magnification, a large objective lens, and a reasonably well optimized design. In the past, coatings made a big difference. Nowadays, high quality anti-reflection coatings have been somewhat commoditized. There's still a difference between the high-end stuff and low-end stuff to some degree, but coatings are not as much of a differentiator as they used to be. I'm not sure what price range you're looking in. If you're shopping sort of in a high-end, more or less anything you look at is going to be very capable. So depending on how much magnification you need, I would just say, probably the right general purpose rifle scope these days. It used to be 3 to 9 by 14, then 2 to 10 by 14. Now, pretty much the general purpose design for a lot of things in this is a 3 to 15 rifle scope, and 3 to 15 by 50 or 3 to 15 by 56 from a good company is likely to be a pretty good low light rifle scope. For my purposes, and high magnification in low light is not that critical. The Acupoint I mentioned earlier, actually I might have called it something else. It's 2.5 to 10 by 56. Did I say 3 to 12 or 2.5 to 10? So the Acupoint is 2.5 to 10 by 56. And that for me is a really, really good magnification range for a low light scope. Right, I hope this answers your question. If you tell me what price range you're looking in, I may be able to make other recommendations. California, and non-coated blanks. Okay, I'll take a look. I'm curious what kind of surface quality they can do. Okay. Are plastic lenses widely used in optics nowadays? What scopes have them? Plastic lenses are used fairly commonly in optics overall. I don't know how much they're used in rifle scopes. I wouldn't be surprised if some cheaper ones have them, but I've never bothered to figure out which ones have them, which ones don't. Um, you I I knew a guy who was a really good optics guy at MIT Lincoln Labs some years ago, and I remember he wrote a paper where he was looking at a size weight performance analysis for imaging optics, and he wrote an interesting paper where he was using he compared two designs that gave overall similar image quality. One was using primarily plastic lenses, another one was using primarily glass lenses. And what he concluded was that if you could sacrifice a little bit of size, you could make things with plastic, high quality plastic, not your shopping bag, right? He could make that design physically a little bit bigger, but it was still lighter than the design made out of glass and give you the same performance for less money, right? So I would not be too much in a rush to condemn various polymer lenses, because if the optical designer knows what he is doing and thinks that in a particular place he should use a plastic lens, I'm not going to argue. That having been said, I don't, all of the higher end rifle scopes that I know of do not use plastic lenses for whatever reason. I didn't dig into the design. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they're not good enough. Maybe they don't have enough space. I don't know. But once again, that is not something I concern myself with at all. William Brown, Laney College in Auckland. Adam the Head started quarter wave acres. He said $35. That was neat. It is very neat. $35 is an important factor. That is very neat. Quarter wave, for my purposes, is not close to enough. Um, for the things I do for my day job, then like that would not cut it at all. But quarter wave for $35 is actually very cool. I will look into this and see. There are actually there are a few applications where I could use a couple of cheap mirrors that I'm not afraid to scratch up. No, that's not a bad idea. Thank you for the tip. I'll definitely look it up and see. Okay, one more, Mr. Rusty Hawk. How do you think the size 1 to 6 reticle is still usable on one accent dark timber brush without illumination? Good question. Yeah, it is. It's not ideal, right? Um, there are better reticles for that, but those four little, kind of an X-wing shaped uh, pointers do help. Once again, it's not ideal, but I think it's usable. It'll work better with illumination. I shot a hog with it. That scope I was looking at it today. It's not bad. It's not bad at all, and as a compromise between giving you good low light visibility without obscuring too much, it's not a bad design at all. But all of these front focal plane low power variable scopes of this type, all of them are really intended to be used with illumination. They make the reticle usable on one power without illumination, but it's never ideal. Okay. And honestly, if you're hunting with a low power variable, I'm assuming you're not shooting that far away. And if you're not shooting that far away, if you're staying within the maximum point blank range of your rifle, a second focal plane low power variable might be more appropriate. Once again, I don't know for sure what you're doing, right? But if you are not shooting terribly far, where you don't need to worry too much about trajectory compensation, stuff like that. But why not get a second focal plate, a rifle scope where the reticle is going to likely have a better visibility on 1 power. Stein Ep.56 1-4 is good. Trap Toric 1-8x24 is quite good. There are plenty of other options. Delta Striker 1-6x24 has a nice, very bold reticle, so even if your illumination is dead, it's very visible. So there are plenty of options. All right, Mr. Brandon Sutton is making a hand gesture. That looks inoffensive. Good evening to you too. Right, on the size 6, I hope that answers your question. I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. It's just that it's a difficult question to answer because brush, timber, all that sort of stuff, a lot there is going to really depend on the rest of your ambient conditions. Because one of the things we always forget to talk about when we talk about low light performance, things like that, we always forget to think about what the eye is doing. And here's why. So when it's fairly bright out, your eye pupil is reasonably gets small, and what it does, it generally increases your the image fidelity of what your brain gets. But on the other hand, it's not collecting as much light. So one of the problems with looking into dark timber, dark brush, and all that during the day, when it's generally fairly bright out, you're just looking at a fairly dark spot, is that your eye pupil is not adapted to those dark conditions. Your eye pupil is adapted to broad daylight, right? If you're in a really weird way, if you're looking into the dark timber, dark brush, depending on light angle situation, all that, you might actually see better when it's dusk or dawn because your eye has already adjusted a little bit, right? So, just something to consider. Has there been any high-power tactical scopes better than the Athlon Ares since it came out from Chinese manufacturer? So I assume, have there been any better Chinese scopes than Athlon Ares, right? What do you think? So I assume you're talking about Athlon Ares ETR 4.5 to 30x56. From what I have seen to date, I do not think I have seen a better Chinese scope so far. Okay. I have seen a couple that to me look like they are essentially made by the same OEM. And one is a Delta Javelin, which to me looks like a very similar scope with different reticles, and Delta reticles are generally well thought out. And to me, Miopt Optica 6 looks like a very similar design, and I think it's a Chinese scope. So Miopta is kind of interesting in that Miopta has just been purchased by someone, by Carlyle Group, and it's really unclear to know what's going to happen with Sporting Optics. I haven't heard anything good or bad one way or the other, so I don't know. But I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with Miopta Sporting Optics going forward. If Carlyle, if the new corporate owners decide that this is a market they want to play with and they're willing to invest a little bit, and with some of the other companies they've purchased, they have been, but they were not in the commercial sector. But if they decide they want to play, they can make Miopta into a real powerhouse because Miopta does have the capability. However, it is unclear to me now what's going to happen. The competition with Chinese scopes is ever growing, and there are a couple that I think of that I think are going to challenge the Ares ETR, but until they're out, I can't really talk about it. So we'll see. But as of right now, in terms of overall performance, the Athlon Ares ETR 4.5 to 30x56 and It's OEM twins or related designs. I think that's the best I've seen to come out of China so far in terms of precision scopes. There's been a lot of hoopla about Arc and a few others that have their strengths and weaknesses. Overall, I'm not hugely impressed. Decent, but all the Arcans I've seen have horrible flare issues. I think they're just not very mature designs. Now, I'm glad they're pushing the envelope. They have good turrets. They're trying to offer more for the money, and every new design they do seems a little better, which is a good thing. So, but I don't think they are quite there to challenge the best, even the best out of China. Okay, that's an interesting question. Do you think a fixed scope is ever practical over a variable scope for hunting? Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, it really depends on what kind of hunting you do and how much money you want to spend. And I'll be honest with you, unless you're doing Western hunting where you're going to shoot fairly far away, I can make a really good case that a high quality 6x42 scope that doesn't weigh a lot and is made by a good manufacturer can give you the bulk of what you need. Look, there is a there's a very loyal following for this WFA fixed power 6x42 scope in the hunting world, right? People, it has exposed turrets. People just take them up, cover them up in some way, and go hunting. It has a good reticle. It doesn't break. If you need a longer shot, it tracks true, and it costs $300, right? If you have $300-400 to spend, and you can find a high quality, good quality fixed power scope for that amount of money, that might be more practical than a variable in the same price range. It doesn't have to be variables, keep on getting better, and they have the economy of scale to help them. But I can make a case for fixed power. Look, I like fixed power scopes. I have like 310 power scopes just for precision because I like the simplicity of them. And for hunting, and other than sheep hunting and all that, if I was so inclined, I can pretty much put a 6 power scope on it and be okay. I mean, I live out west. My distances get a little bit longer, right? I mean, the two elk I shot were, one was right at 300 yards, another one's 338. The sheep, I'm looking at the skull over there, is about 450. Pigs were shot at under 200, but that was with a thermal. So I don't know. Like I said, outside of the Western hunting, you can do very well with just a straight 6 power scope. And if you're in the woods, straight 4 power. The basic problem, though, is that increasingly fewer manufacturers make them because people don't buy them, and because it's more fashionable to have a variable power scope. So because there are not as many made, it's not always as good of a deal. But if you find a good quality one, it's wonderful. Look, if you can find a good deal on like a Schmidt's, older 4x36 or 6x42 Hungaria scopes, or the older German ones that had a 6x42 PM2 that Doug at Camerland brought back a while back when it was $2,000. I didn't have the money. I should have bought it. Schmidt 6x42 in terms of overall optimization stuff, probably one of the best rifle scopes ever made of any type. Right? So I can make a good case for a fixed power. Link. Is it true that optical design is bought out from another OEM like Light Optics or just made in China, or the Chinese manufacturers did their own design? I honestly don't know. So I have somewhat a reasonable relationship with a couple of companies that OEM in China, and they do their own design. But it doesn't mean that at some point they didn't buy a design from Japan or didn't just copy a design from Japan. I really don't know. For the Ares ETR, I have no clue. So when I first got it, I thought that maybe it was copied from the Light Optics Works 4.5 to 30 design because the magnification range is the same. But when I look at them, I don't think so. I think there are distinct differences, at least as far as objective lens goes. There is some art in how to design the erector system, so it wouldn't surprise me if somebody, some Chinese OEM went and paid some money to some experienced Japanese optical designers to design the erector system for them. and then do their own objective and eyepiece, for example. I really don't know what happens behind the scenes. Mm, I'm not really involved in that part of it, and I don't hugely care. I do suspect there's a fair amount of copying going back and forth, but the overall quality of many Chinese-made rifle scopes have really gone up. I mean, some of them have really surprised me. For example, these new prismatics from Element. I mean, they're made in China and they're designed in China, to the best of my knowledge. Because most of that, like the optics, the eyepieces are designed with China. There's a small OEM that they work with. It's amazing eyepieces, right? And then unlike anything else, I think they're indigenously designed by the Chinese OEM. So there's clearly has been a significant growth in domestic capability of designing optics in China. And a lot of look, I mean, I just did this comparison of 3 to 18 scopes, and that was the Primary Arms JLX made in the Philippines, Vortex Strike Eagle 3 to 18 by 44, it's China, and Element Titan 3 to 18 by 50, also China. In terms of image quality, both of the Chinese scopes were better than the Philippine-made JLX. Now, all three are quite good, but both the Chinese scopes are better, which is quite remarkable, right? So they're clearly doing something right. Okay, what did I miss? I didn't miss anything. Right. Once again, not necessarily a very straight answer because I don't have a straight answer. Right? It's not a simple yes or no thing because I suspect all of the above happens to some degree. Do you think a low power variable would be good for hunting medium game out to about 300 plus minus yards with brush? Uh, it depends. During the day, yeah, I don't see why not. But as the light gets low, a small objective diameter of a low power variable will be not ideal. It'll still work, right? It's not like the light just turns off, right? You need to stay on 4 power or less in low light, and you'll be okay. But it's not ideal. For these kind of things, the traditional scope really used to be something like 1.5 to 6 by 40, and that was a very good combination for it. A modern iteration of that, and there are a few designs like this out there. Unfortunately, they tend to be a little bit on the heavy side, but they are good. The scope I have that probably would be most ideal for this is from Delta Optical. So Delta is a Polish company, and they make stuff in Japan and China and Philippines, all of it. This one is part of their titanium line, which is made in Japan. And the scope I have, and I'm going to have a review out on it shortly, is the 1.5 to 9 by 45. It's not a very lightweight scope. It's kind of beefy, and it's like 24, 25 ounce, something like that, which is heavy for a hunting scope. It is second focal plane. It has a couple of things going for it. The optical quality is very, very well done. It's very good in low lights. It's just a nice low light general purpose combination. It sits on my 300 WSM lever gun. I have a Browning BLR lever gun. That for me is like a 300 yards and in gun, right? So it's not a gun I plan to do a lot of holdover with and stuff like that. On 1.5, it has a very bold reticle. It is seriously fast. The reticle illumination is done with a fiber, so it's a very bright fiber dot. And 1.5, it's fast. And then on 9 power, I get good distance. But the nice thing is that it's got a 45 millimeter objective, so it is exceptionally nice in low light. Compared to low power variable, what I'm compromising here is that instead of 1 power low end, I have a 1.5, and that's a big difference. But for the things I may want to do within the hunting aspect of it, 1.5 for me is low enough. It works really well behind thermals. It works very nicely in low light by itself. So I'd probably be more inclined to lean towards something like that. Okay, LPO will work in a pinch, and it's much better than irons, especially as the light gets low. But a 1.5 to 9 by 45 is a better option. Okay, I hope that answers your question. All right, guys, we're getting close to 2 hour mark, and I try not to keep these things going for more than 2 hours. If there's anything else, I'll take another 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to wrap this up. I'll refill my glass, let you think about it for a moment, and if nothing comes up, I will bid you good night. Going once, going twice, and sold. All right, guys. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for sticking with me for these 2 possibly long hours. I always wonder how many of you I managed to put to sleep, and apparently I don't have that much emotion in my cadence. But Link has a question. All right. I mentioned Leupold Mark III 3 to 12 fiber fired dot reticle. Despite the track record they had before, it's under 16 hours in weight, meaning with a mount and red dot side, it's under 20 hours. What do you think of the concept? It's not a bad concept. I just am not a big fan of the Mark III scopes. It's based on the same old design that Leupold has been making for a long time, and I'm not a huge fan. For me, with Leupold, the good stuff starts at VX5, VX6, Mark V. They're less expensive things. I'm just not a fan. So conceptually, it'll work just fine. But honestly, if you're looking for something with a fiber reticle that with a 3 power and a low end, just go get a Trigicon AccuPoint 3 to 9 by 40 with a mil dot reticle. It has fiber illumination. It's perfectly bright, easy to see. It weighs, I think, 14, 15 ounces, something like that. It's more compact, I think, than the Leupold. Put that in the mount, it's going to be even lighter and smaller. And I think I like that scope more than Mark III. All right, as I was beginning to tell you guys, I bid you all good night. Thank you for staying with me. If there's anything I covered that you'd like more information on, put something in the comments, and I will answer the best I can. And if you're trying to get a hold of me quickly, the best way to do so is via my locals website, darklordofoptics.com. Takes you there. Thank you, and good night.